They're sick of these midnight deadlines, and they want bipartisan solutions right now. And you know what?
We're not.
Mr. President, as we all know right now, the federal government's in a shutdown, and unfortunate. Certainly don't think it had to happen last night. I think there's some good news. If you're watching some of the speeches today, you see a lot of ideas coming to the floor, a lot of bipartisan ideas that I think on a lot of key issues that I think hopefully our country's going to make some progress on. Let me just give a few examples for those who've been watching. For those who haven't, the presiding officer, I'm not trying to embarrass him or anything, but I watched my friend from Arizona's speech a couple hours ago on the way forward, what we can do to break through this unfortunate circumstance we have right now, and I think he certainly has a lot of good ideas, and I commend him and appreciate his leadership on those issues. My good friend, the senator from Maine, Senator King, he was down here talking about continuing resolutions and these huge omnibuses and how, and I would agree with him completely. As a matter of fact, Senator King and I had a long discussion on the floor last night about this, how the system is broken. And there's a number of senators, I think some of the newer senators, who see it that way. This is no way to move forward to fund our government. The way it works with these continuing resolutions, these huge omnibuses at the end of the year. So there's a number of us, and I think it's bipartisan, who want to look at reforms to fix this. Senator Perdue of Georgia has been leading efforts, and I think that that's very important, and I certainly am part of that group, look at longer-term fixes. The senator from Michigan came down and talked about community health centers. Community health centers are incredibly important for my state of Alaska. As a matter of fact, 10% of all community health centers in the country, 160, are in my state. So I couldn't agree more about the necessity to move forward on more stable funding. Also, a number of senators were just down on the floor giving very impassioned remarks about the Child Health Insurance Program, CHIP. And again, very important in my state. A lot of people in this country are concerned about the reauthorization of CHIP, and there were some passionate statements on the floor. I would say to my colleagues, respectfully, and I respect all of them and welcome the opportunity to work with all of them, they didn't actually address the one issue when they said, boy, a lot of Americans are worried about this, have been for 3 months, but they didn't say why they actually didn't vote to reauthorize it last night, 6-year reauthorization. You know, there was this discussion about, you know, the senator from Ohio talked about people worried and concerned. Well, guess what? Last night, he had the opportunity to get rid of their worries and concerns. And when they woke up this morning, they were still worried and concerned. And so were my Alaskan constituents, which is why I voted for the bill last night. Because had we voted for the bill on CHIP, the worries and concerns would have gone away. So there's a lot of passion speeches on this issue, but not one of them actually said, but here's why I didn't vote for it last night. Be good to know what the answer to that is. But, Mr. President, what I really want to do, I want to come to the floor again to emphasize something that I've made a few remarks on in the last couple days on the floor, because it's something that I'm concerned about and it's something I want the American people to recognize. And it's a big issue for me. I think the American people need to be skeptical when they hear on the floor the minority leader and part of his leadership team with their new talking points about their focus on the military and military spending and rebuilding our military. In the run-up to the shutdown, we started to see the minority leader and some of the leadership team trotting out new talking points. They went like this: with the shutdown approaching, we are really, really concerned about the military and readiness and funding for our troops and their families and rebuilding the military. In fact, in the last 3 days, I think I've heard more from the leadership of the other side on this issue, the leaders, than I have in 3 years, my 3 years in the Senate. And, you know, I think the minority leader in the last 3 days is starting to sound like my good friend from Arizona, Senator McCain, this body's true champion of the military and military funding. Now, I actually welcome this change of heart by the minority leader. There's a group of us in the Senate, many who serve on the Armed Services Committee led by Senator McCain, who have been focused on increasing funding for our troops. A lot of it's Republicans, but it's also some Democrats. I see my good friend from West Virginia is on the floor. He's certainly one of them. He's on that committee. We talk about this issue a lot. Senator King was down here on the floor again. He's focused on this issue. It's an issue that a lot of us in this body have been focused on daily, whether on the armed services or in other committees. The senator from West Virginia and I also serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee together. And for me, it's one of the most important issues that we can focus on here in this body, the national defense of our country. I've had the honor of serving in the Marine Corps for almost a quarter century, and to my state, the great state of Alaska, these issues are enormously important to my constituents. We have more veterans per capita than any state in the country, thousands of active duty and reserve troops, thousands of civilians that support them in our numerous bases in Alaska because of our strategic location. So a number of us really, really care about these issues regarding the military and funding and supporting our troops. So as I mentioned, Mr. President, I welcome the Democratic leader's new focus in the last 72 hours on military readiness and full funding as we put forward a National Defense Authorization bill that really started to rebuild our military and supporting our troops and their families. But I must admit that I'm a little bit skeptical. Matter of fact, I'm very skeptical. And I think the American people who are watching these debates and listening, whether on TV or in the gallery, when you see these new talking points about concern from the Democratic leader about our troops and funding, you should be skeptical too. Why? Why? What is really going on here? Why all this new talk? Again, more than 72 hours than I've seen as a presiding officer and watching C-SPAN in 3 years from the Democratic leader on how important it is funding our troops. Well, I think he might be overcompensating. I think that they might be a bit worried. I think that they might be feeling a bit defensive. I think they might be trying to preempt arguments that their policies of late are actually really harmful to the military and our troops and their families. And if you look at the record, Mr. President, their policies of late have been really harmful to our military and our troops and our families. And this is the most important point. Actions on this issue speak louder than words. Policies that are being promoted are a lot more important to look at than newly crafted, slick talking points. Let me provide a few examples. The most recent was simply last night. We had a government shutdown. We didn't need to have a government shutdown, but we had a government shutdown. It was driven by the Democratic leader, but the people who are hurt the most on this, by far, are our troops and the civilians who support them. And we all know this. We all know this. Because as of today, guess what? The Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps who's deployed overseas in Iraq, he's not getting paid. And when you're a Lance Corporal, you don't make a lot of money. Well, he's not getting paid. He's risking his life for his country, he's in combat, protecting our national interests, and he doesn't get paid. That happened last night. Now, we talk about how bad a continuing resolution. Again, the Democratic leader was making all the, hey, a continuing resolution is really bad for our troops. That's why I'm so skeptical of it. I want to protect the troops. Wrong. A continuing resolution is really bad for our troops. There's no doubt about it. But what's worse is a government shutdown. Ask any military leader. Ask any military leader what the disruption that happened on the Senate floor last night does to our readiness and our ability to protect this country. I've served in the reserves and active duty for almost 25 years. I remember in 2013, getting ready for reserve duty training. We didn't even know if we were going to train, not, emails. No idea when the government was shut down. It was chaos, just as the Democratic leader predicted it would be. Here's another one, survivor benefits. So a survivor benefit is to a spouse or child of someone who is related to one of our heroes who was killed in the line of duty. Really important that we as a government take care of those families. Guess what happened last night when we shut down the government? Survivor benefits stopped being paid. So, again, stay skeptical on this idea that, hey, we really are, new points, we're really supporting our troops. Last night was a case in point where actions speak louder than words, not supporting the troops at all, and the civilians. In my state, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of patriotic civilian members of the military, or civilians who support the military, many of whom were retired military, who are now not going to go to work on Monday, if we're still shut down, at the military bases to support our troops. So, that's not helping our troops. Let me give another example of where actions speak louder than words. We've been having very difficult discussions, and they're tough. It's one of the reasons why we need to fix our budget process on to what level we should be increasing funding for the military, which a number of us, again, particularly those serving on the Armed Services Committee, have authorized a significant increase. And again, it was bipartisan on the NDAA bill. But the Democratic leader has been demanding in these negotiations what he calls parity. Parity, it sounds simple. What does that mean? Let me give you a little background on that. From 2010 to 2016, we cut our defense spending by 25%. 25%. As national security threats to our country increase. There's nobody who disputes that. ISIS, Iran, Russia, China, these are all North Korea. These are all challenges right now facing us. And we were cutting our spending and cutting troops, dramatically cutting troops. Well, I think pretty much everybody in this body is saying, whoa, bad idea, shouldn't do that. In the NDAA, we dramatically increased the authorization for our military. Good step, very bipartisan. But in these negotiations that we've been having over the last several months, the demand from the Democratic leader is any increase in the Department of Defense budget has to be met with an equivalent increase in domestic agencies. In other words, you want to increase the budget for the Marine Corps? Increase the budget for the EPA. Now, I think, Mr. President, most Americans don't agree with that. And it certainly doesn't show some kind of newfound respect for supporting our troops. But that's what's happening right now. Again, actions speaking louder than words. Let me provide one final example of actions that certainly don't seem to be supporting our military speaking louder than words. Unfortunately, the other side is starting to have a practice, a regular practice, of filibustering spending for our troops. Now, let me explain this. In 2015, a number of us, we were newly elected, and we said, we need a better budget process. Obviously, we're seeing that it's not working well. Let's go through the regular order. Let's get the Appropriations Committee to work really hard and put out 12 appropriations bills. They debate it in the Appropriations Committee. And then let's bring them to the floor and let's vote on them. That way you avoid this crazy omnibus continuing resolution debacle that we find ourselves in today and most of the time. So we were really focused on doing that. And we tried. Matter of fact, the Appropriations Committee did a great job, a lot of hard work, very bipartisan, and they reported out 12 appropriations bills by the spring of 2015. And most of those bills, Mr. President, were very bipartisan. Very bipartisan. So what we thought was, all right, that's a good start. Everybody seems to want to do that. Let's bring up the bill that's actually really important. 2015, the rise of ISIS. Our troops are in combat. Let's bring the Defense Appropriations Bill, which came out of committee unanimously. Every senator on the Appropriations Committee, Democrat and Republican, voted for that. Let's bring that to the floor. So we did. Let's have a debate. We're going to fund our military. These new talking points about supporting our troops. So what happened that summer, Mr. President? Democratic leadership filibustered the spending for our troops. They wouldn't let us vote on the bill. They wouldn't let it come to the floor. They stopped funding for our troops. So a number of us were upset. I know some of the Democrats were upset by this because they didn't all support it, but you only need 41 to filibuster like we saw last night. So a number of us said, well, let's keep bringing it up. They can't be serious. Our troops are in combat. Everybody knows we have national security threats. The bill came out of committee unanimously. Let's bring it up again. Because I guarantee you, if their constituents back home, whatever state they're from, whatever party they're in, Democrat, Republican, if they knew that their senator was filibustering the spending for their national security and the troops and their families, they probably wouldn't be very happy. So we brought it to the floor again, and again, and again, 5 times. And guess what? Every time the Democratic leadership filibustered spending for our troops. Now again, I guarantee you that was probably 80% support in this country or more. Hey, let's vote on that. Came out of committee unanimously. Troops are protecting us all over the world. Let's vote on that. We never got to vote on it. So, Mr. President, in conclusion, the next time the minority leader comes to the floor during this debate emphasizing his concerns about our troops and their funding and the need to rebuild them and their well-being, Shakespeare's insights about protesting a bit too much should come to mind. Be skeptical. Be skeptical. Actions speak louder than words. This has not been a focus of the Democratic leadership. And here's what I believe is happening. Given their actions, which included what happened last night, which really harms our military, and everybody knows it, given their actions, the specter of the Democratic Party once again becoming equated with America's anti-military party, which occurred in the 1970s, is haunting them. Now again, I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and I serve with wonderful senators, Democrats and Republicans, who support the military, who support our veterans, being on the Veterans Affairs Committee. And I know the vast majority in this body support our troops. But the actions of the leadership on the other side don't show that. And yet they're trotting out new talking points about their newfound focus of rebuilding the military and taking care of our troops and their families. So let me just make this final suggestion. The best way to actually show that to the American people, all of whom support it, is not through newly crafted, slick talking points, but through actions and policies that truly and sincerely focus on what we all agree we need to do, which is rebuild our military, rebuild readiness, take care of the troops and their families. And we can start by ending this ill-conceived government shutdown as soon as possible as one concrete action to actually do that. I yield the floor.